We're not going to have big wars of conquest. We're not going to keep on extending the empire. This is it. This is the end.
The wall, with its many gateways, also served as an economic barrier for collecting taxes on trade and preventing weapons dealing between local tribes. And Hadrian, a general himself who'd spent much of his life in the army, would have been conscious of keeping the legions busy so they had less time to hatch political plots.
There's nothing more dangerous, I would have thought, than a highly trained killer with nothing to do. I mean, what is your soldier? He's a highly trained killer, paid by the state. If you don't give him anything to do, you're asking for trouble.
The wall might also be a monument to Hadrian's ego. He loved building on a grand scale and considered himself an expert on architecture. He personally helped to redesign the Pantheon in Rome. And Hadrian's own villa, just outside Rome, was so huge that it took 1,000 soldiers just to guard the perimeter. It covered 300 acres, twice the size of the city of Pompeii. While Hadrian's Wall and other defensive barriers were strong symbols of the limits of the empire, they were not strict borderlines. The Roman army still controlled areas well beyond the physical frontiers.
The Romans would patrol long distances beyond those frontiers and also had networks of spies and intelligence agents. They would expect to know of any possible threat to those frontier lines well in advance and could actually nip it in the bud.
At Vindolanda, excavations have revealed a letter written by a Roman officer out on patrol, well beyond the official frontier.
And he actually writes into our commanding officer saying that they've done their job. Should the men be dispersed back to their units, or should they all be brought back to Vindolanda? But the real point of his letter has got nothing to do with that. The real point of his letter is that the men have run out of their beer supplies. He's asked for more. They haven't come. Why not?
Another way the Romans patrolled their many borders was with their navy. The remains of these Roman ships were found buried in the muddy banks of Germany's River Rhine in 1981 by construction workers laying the foundations for a hotel. Based on what was found and referring to Roman artworks, experts have built life-size replicas of Roman ships at the Naval Museum at Mainz in Germany.
The Romans largely used oared warships, galleys, and these were crewed actually not by slaves, as Ben-Hur has suggested, but actually by free sailors and marines. So a typical warship was actually quite small in the imperial period, maybe with a crew of not much more than 50, with its own individual officers and, of course, a captain. And a vessel like that would largely be used for maritime patrolling, keeping an eye on possible piracy and practices like that.
The ship reconstructed here was 65 feet long, powered by 32 oarsmen, or sails when the wind was right. Capable of going 12 miles an hour, it carried extra soldiers, in addition to the rowers, and was used to patrol trouble spots along the Rhine. Rome had naval bases throughout the empire, using the ships mainly for troop transport and protecting trade. For much of the empire's history, the Romans did not need to fight great sea battles, because after Rome conquered Carthage and Egypt, there were no other sea powers left. When the Emperor Hadrian decided to fix the borders of the Roman Empire, he helped change the nature of the Roman army itself. Instead of making new conquests, many soldiers now had fixed addresses on the frontiers and were now defenders rather than attackers. The forts reflect the change, with a gradual shift from timber to stone. This is what a stone fort looked like in its day. The fort at Solberg in Germany, rebuilt on the foundations of the original. Roman forts were usually sited at strategic points, like a mountain pass or a river crossing. They were rectangular, enclosing an area of up to 50 acres, and had defensive towers every 50 to 60 yards to launch missiles against attackers. There were also deep ditches around them to repel enemy raids. The fort's central building, the Principia, was the administration centre, with offices set around a courtyard. But most of the fort was taken up with the barrack blocks, in which the common soldier got to know his fellow legionaries more closely than he may have liked.
This is one of many barrack rooms in the fort here at Chester's on Hadrian's Wall. And in this particular space, 8 soldiers would have spent their leisure hours, and this is where they would have slept. This whole area here would have been divided off by some kind of partition around about here. The room out at the front was probably where they kept all their equipment. So it was in an area like this that all of these soldiers actually had to eat and sleep. And in fact, they may have not have been on their own. It's quite possible that also some of them at least will have had their wives and children in here. This was a very crowded place.
Living arrangements were much more civilized for the career officers, the centurions.
In comparison to the spaces lived in by ordinary soldiers, a centurion had a whole house to himself. This large rectangle of foundations here are the remains of one such centurion's house here at Chester's. And you can see there are a number of rooms. He had a separate living room, kitchen, storage facilities, bedroom. There was plenty of space for him and his family, his wife, his servants, all to live in together. And this actually reflects in stone the great difference in social standing between an ordinary soldier in one of these barrack rooms and a centurion. Centurions were paid at least 20 times as much as ordinary soldiers and had living accommodation appropriate to their standing.
For the commanding officer, the living quarters were almost like a country villa, reflecting his position as a nobleman. The example unearthed at Vindolanda Fort on Hadrian's Wall came with central heating.
The hot air, which is, the furnace must be next door, in comes the hot air, circulates around the pillars, and then it comes up through the walls. Now, in here we know there's a wall vent, there's another one here, and the hot air is drawn up through the walls and then out through the top. It's actually a very efficient heating system for a house. With one proviso, you do need half a dozen slaves to keep, to keep the boilers going.
Because of the strict social order in Roman life, the commander did not socialize with the enlisted men.
We've got the remains of the social diary of our commander Flavius Cerealis, covering a period of 2.5 years. And in that course of that time, he is giving quite a lot of dinner parties. Dinner parties for the governor of Britain when he comes here, dinner parties for fellow commanding officers, and once, rather nicely, a dinner party for his veterans, the soldiers who just recently retired. But there's no hint of all other ranks coming in and eating at the commander's table.
The commander, unlike the common soldiers, was officially allowed to have his whole family live with him in the fort. And there is wonderful evidence of that.
Here are the shoes of his wife, and it's so rare for us to be able to say that that little slipper belongs to Sulpicia Lepidina, wife of Flavius Cerealis. She has a very distinctive shoe size. Look at all these little indentations here. The shoe is stamped with the name of the maker, Lucius Ibutius Thales, and a sort of maple leaf stamped on it as well. And we've got several of her shoes, all the same little size. They have their 3 children with them there. And here's the little one's little boot. Now, that is a very expensive little boot. That's all hand-carved out of a single piece of leather. And he's even got his little studs in the bottom. And you can see how he's been going over on his heel, sort of dragging his typical small boy, I would think.
Roman forts on the frontiers were like self-contained Roman towns. Almost every fort had a bathhouse, like this one excavated at Chester's on Hadrian's Wall. Romans were fanatical about bathing and hygiene, and their baths were an elaborate process. The soldiers also used the baths as a recreation area to relax away from the discipline of the fort. This bathhouse has been recreated at Xanten in Germany.
We are in the bathhouse. Soldiers entered in this room, that's the changing room. They undressed and put their clothes in these boxes and went to the next room, to the bathroom. This is where they used to come first, to get clean. They put oil on their skin, and with this scraper, they took the oil off they washed themselves and they went into the bath. So this is the warm water bath. It was kept at the 100 degrees Fahrenheit by the furnace, which is next door. So people stayed in this warm water. After finishing, they went to the next bath, which is the cold bath. This is the cold bath, and Romans believed that it was good to take a cold bath to improve the blood circulation. So after finishing their bath in the cold water, they went to the club room. So this is the club room where soldiers came after having their cold bath. They could stay for a while here. They could talk to each other, playing dice, having massage, and just forget being a soldier for a short while.
Another prominent example of plumbing was the toilets, which were communal. Seats were only 2 feet apart and were open to the air, except for a small roof. Because toilet paper had not yet been invented, soldiers used a sponge on a stick, which they cleaned in the water channel that ran in front of the seats. For the soldiers' amusements, many forts had amphitheatres, like this one reconstructed at Xanten. They were used for special festivals, including religious sacrifices, and also modest versions of Roman games, including gladiatorial contests. Soldiers on the frontiers needed diversions because there were long periods of boring peace.
I would have thought that most Roman soldiers serving on the wall here, doing their full 25 years, might never cast a spear in anger in the whole of that time.
Soldiers spent much of their time doing paperwork. The forts generated mountains of it. At one fort, some of it has miraculously survived. We'll hear soldiers' letters from 2,000 years ago, giving a fascinating portrait of life on the frontier. At a Roman fort in the north of England, archaeologists are discovering a treasure trove of personal items left by the troops, giving us an amazingly intimate portrait of the Roman soldier's life. From deep in the mud at Vindolanda Fort have come hundreds of soldiers' letters.
Here is an example of a document written in ink on specially prepared wood. It's either alder or birch, local wood that they've specially created these tablets for. We don't work from the originals at all. We work entirely from the infrared photographs because they show up so much more than you can see with the naked eye. Direct messages from the past. There's a lovely one, and that is from an officer, our commanding officer, a draft letter going out from here saying, "When I was with you, I left behind all my hunting nets. Please send them on to me, namely my special drag nets for swans, the small nets for thrushes," and, so it goes on. This extraordinary letter coming in to a soldier saying, "I am sending you a parcel of some socks, 2 pairs of shoes," and then it said subligaria. Now, subligaria is a very rare word, and that had people thumbing through all the dictionaries. It does appear, I think, in a fairly rare poem of the poet Catullus. It's underpants.
And much more than just letters have been found at Vindolanda. There are all sorts of weapons and evidence of how the soldiers used them.
Often we pick up a thing like this, which is the skull of a Roman cattle, a cow or an oxen or something. It's been poleaxed. You can see the big indentation here. Someone has banged it like that. And then it's obviously been stuck on a pole and used for target practice. We have actually several of these. You can see where the Roman ballistas have gone boom, straight in.
The deep soil and mud at Vindolanda is so well suited to preserving ancient artifacts that even Roman textiles have been found in good condition.
That is what it looks like. It's a Roman bandage, made of some quite good quality local wool. But we get everything from bandages to bits of big jerseys, even a sock made out of two different pieces of textiles sewn together. But again, you know, it's wonderful getting the textiles. They've lost their colour.